In 2017, after the Ultimate Spider-Man show thankfully concluded, they launched on Disney XD the Marvel's Spider-Man, or just Spider-Man show. Season 1 was jam-packed, featuring plenty of allies and enemies, including, but not limited to, Miles Morales, the Vulture, the Scorpion, the Jackal, Gwen Stacy, who does become Spider-Gwen, Anya Corazon, who also gets spider powers, Black Cat, Venom, Max Modell, the Rhino, Sandman, who is murdered by his own daughter on screen, Hammerhead, Tony Stark, the Hulk, Kraven the Hunter, Black Widow, Man-Wolf, Blizzard, Dr. Kirk Connors, aka the Lizard, Dr. Octopus, Flash Thompson, and lots of big violent robots. You're probably like, wow, that sounds like way too much, and it is. But they still managed to basically hold it all together. The emotional core of this season is the friendship between Peter Parker and Harry Osborn, and it's about freaking time. So in several of the movies and either like other cartoon series, it's like, I don't get why these guys are friends. Harry is often kind of embarrassed by what a loser Peter is, or he's really envious of him. He's often just like a bad friend, and you're left wondering why they even hang out together. But that's not a question in this show. They are best friends who actually like each other. Peter actually got bit by the, Spider-Man spider because Harry was having a good friend moment, letting Peter go first to do a thing. And this is wonderful considering it takes Harry just one episode to start hating Spider-Man. But he still likes Peter just fine. Even when they wind up in different schools, they make the time to meet up and have smoothies. Every teenage boy's favorite. So basically, the show is offering something that other Spider-Man media, that at least I had access to, did not have, which was a friendship story. And I love friendship stories. So I saw just a few minutes of one of the last episodes in the season, and seeing the signs of friendship, I went back and I watched the entire first season. So when season 2 aired in June 2018, I was there for the premiere. I was psyched. You guys don't understand. I never watch TV. I'm almost never there for premieres. To put you in my shoes, let me share 4 key things that they did right in season 1 that made me really excited. 1, a likable cast. This show very wisely relegates Uncle Ben's death and the events surrounding that to the prequel shorts. So all of the things that we already know about Peter and Spider-Man's backstory, that's all happened before the first couple episodes. So by the time the show's starting, you're just getting to know everyone. I like this Peter. He starts off a little too hyper and over-the-top nerdy, but the writers toned this down a lot pretty quickly. And they also toned down their really heavy-handed science is awesome shtick. It's still kind of there, but it's not as annoying. So yeah, after the first few episodes of the season, things level out, and Peter is good old, humble, reliable old Peter Parker. And I basically liked everyone else. I liked Harry. I liked Peter's classmates. I loved Miles. He and Peter are schoolmates. Then they become friends, and Miles is also his secret keeper. He's the first one who knows that he's Spider-Man, and he's the only one who knows for a long time. So I also knew that I liked our supporting cast when they just have a very appropriate reaction to Peter going through his black suit symbiote phase. They find his very un-Peter Parker-like ego and attitude just as iffy as I do. So that was nice. The second thing that was well done was that Peter and Harry were nerdy fools, but with drama. So you get to see a wide range of best friend interactions between these two, from working on a science project together, to Peter low-key venting about his money problems, and Harry offering to help him financially. And a lot of people wouldn't trust any of their friends with their money, even if they're really rich. But, it just says a lot that he trusts them to make good use of it, even though Peter doesn't accept it. The show does a really good job of show don't tell with their friendship in general, and this reaches a fantastic high note in the Halloween episode where these morons are wearing one of those 2-part horse costumes and Peter doesn't show up. I mean, he comes as Spider-Man, but not as Peter. So that leaves Harry looking like this for basically the whole episode. He does eventually get rid of the hat, but that doesn't really make it any better. I hate that the show never explains them wearing this terrible costume. Like, there's a line in this episode where Harry's like, Halloween has always been our holiday, but like, that doesn't give an answer. Like, maybe it's an inside joke, or maybe they have a tradition of wearing the most terrible costumes that they can find every year, or something else. Like, I feel like I would have preferred that over, you know, a minute more of the Hulk smashing things. But, you know, they didn't ask me. Anyway, the Halloween episode was also one of my favorites because we also find out more about what this friendship means to Harry.
Being the son of Norman Osborn doesn't seem so bad. That's exactly the problem. Everybody sees me as Norman Osborn's son. But Peter is the only one who sees me as... me.
The show is not subtle about the themes of honesty, authenticity, and lies. Harry feels like he can be open and himself with Peter. And later on, one of them, I think it was Peter, says, there's no need to wear a mask with our friendship. Peter keeping secrets is a huge problem in the first season. And the fact that these besties usually get along so well makes it even more painful when Harry blames Spider-Man for his experiment in the first episode blowing up. Harry is blamed for the explosion by his fancy nerd school, Horizon Academy. Harry knows he didn't do it, but he's been framed, so he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't have enough evidence to prove that he didn't do it, because he doesn't know he's being framed, and no one else does, except for the people responsible for it, Obvi. So he turns around and he blames Spider-Man because he was there. So, like, James Jonah Jameson isn't really in season 1, but like it doesn't matter because the Osborns fill in for him. They even use the word menace when describing Spider-Man, which is the best. Something about Harry is also that he doesn't handle stress very well. He's always yelling and screaming, usually at Spider-Man.
And what did you do to my friend Pete? I webbed him a parachute. He should be around here somewhere. Well, he's not. So help me find him or I'll tear you apart!
Peter keeping his identity a secret does create some good drama, but there are several times in the first several episodes where you're left wondering why he just doesn't tell Harry. I mean, yeah, Harry doesn't like Spidey, and it would be sad for your best friend to maybe stop liking you because he realizes you're this superhero menace guy. But would that really be any worse than what's actually going down? I think that they could have easily explained this by having Peter be familiar with another superhero who came from a similar, like, you know, socioeconomic background, who his secret identity was let out, and that guy, his family and friends, they were killed or their lives were ruined. So we would know why Peter wants to keep his identity such a secret so badly. And establishing that fear in a way that the viewer can, like, easily understand and empathize with would just make Peter keeping this a secret a little less aggravating. I mean, I know it's like superhero rules, you keep your identity, and there is an exchange, I don't remember in which season, where, I think it's actually the 3rd season, where Modell finds out Peter's secret, and he's like, why don't you tell everyone you're Spider-Man, Peter? And Peter's like, the other people who share their secret identities, they're like Tony Stark and Captain America. They're like Tony Stark and Captain America. They are rich and powerful, and their family and friends or whatever, they are also well protected and rich, and often are also superheroes. Like, they don't have an Aunt May who is defenseless against supervillains, and they all don't have a best friend whose father is a supervillain. So, I think that is not a bad reason, but they didn't, I don't think he ever talked about that in the first season. The first season does have a thing where Miles gets his powers, and he basically tells everyone, I'm the new superhero on the block. He doesn't reveal his secret to everybody, but he's like, he tells everyone where he's from and literally what street he lives on. Obviously, the villains target his home, I mean, they don't know it's his home. They just know he lives there somewhere. So so that's like not a bad foil, but it still isn't entirely applicable to the situation that Harry and Peter have. So I think that they could have just done a little bit more to set this up. Anyway, Peter and Harry are good foils for each other in general, which is really good whenever you have two main characters. Peter is cool under pressure. Harry is generally not. Harry is ambitious. Peter isn't really. Peter has notably fewer economic privileges. Like, he gets into Horizon, but he struggles with tuition. And but he struggles with keeping paid internships so he can stay, and etc. But he does have a healthy, warm home life with Aunt May. Harry's home life is very different than Peter's, which leads us into the third thing that they did well, which is that Norman Osborn was the freaking worst. I mean, Norman is always the worst, but like, remember, stupid secrets aside, Peter and Harry actually really care about each other in this show. And Peter has known Norman for as long as he's known Harry, which is implied to be several years, maybe from childhood. So as the show progresses and we and Peter start seeing how much of a bad father Norman is and just like a bad person in general, it just makes it hit a lot harder. I like that the writers made sure that every time there was what could be a nice father-son moment between Norman and Harry, there would always be something wrong with it.
I expect great things from you, Harry. So don't mess up again.
I thought I could make a name for myself. At Horizon...
Make no mistake, Harry. No matter what you accomplish in life, you will always have the name I provided you. I poured my soul into the Osborn Academy to save you the embarrassment of crawling back to that school. How do you think it would look if you abandoned me? I beg you, as your father, please stay.
Norman is pretty good at lying to and gaslighting other characters, which prominently includes Otto Octavius, aka Doc Ock, who he gets to teach at his own fancy nerd school instead of Horizon, and also his son Harry. And the worst part is that his manipulation works. Much of the first season is basically Harry falling more and more under his father's influence. Harry is given the option and the chance to return to Horizon, but he chooses to stay at the nerd school his father made.
I can't say no to him when he's given me so much.
So Norman thinks Spidey is working with the Jackal, who did make the spiders that bit Peter and Miles and turned them into, spider people. And so Norman quickly encourages Harry distrust of Spider-Man, and it's super convenient for him because, remember the experiment that Harry was framed for blowing up and that Harry blames Spider-Man for blowing up? Well, Norman set that up. It's his fault that happened. He literally blew up his son's hopes and dreams. He didn't want Harry in Horizon, where he would be outside of his control, so he got him kicked out of Horizon and started, this is its actual name, the Osborn Academy for Geniuses. Yeah, so he started that and he enrolled Harry there, basically to control him.
That's why I created Oz Academy. To mold you, to encourage you, to turn you into something better.
Peter does find out that Norman is doing this, but it is late in the season. Harry is very much under his father's influence. Peter doesn't have the type of evidence that would convince Harry. He doesn't really have any evidence at all, other than, while I was Spider-Man and snooping around your building, I oversaw some security footage where your father basically admitted to sabotaging your experiment. Now, Harry does almost agree to take a second look at things just because of how much he trusts Peter, but then Dr. Octopus, who is a professor at the Academy for Geniuses, comes along and, with no ill intentions, shares his own theory, which Peter kind of confirmed as a way to throw off suspicion, that Peter is working with Spider-Man, like, as an accomplice. And Harry takes this as well as you would expect.
I don't believe you! Get out!
There is a great moment after this where Peter is like, I think Norman is very wrong to lie to his son, but I am lying to Harry too. So that kind of makes me a hypocrite. And yeah, and he seriously considers telling Harry the truth, but he's also like, well, Norman is the type of man who would use his own son to get to Spider-Man, to get to, you know, his own son's best friend. And so if Harry knows the truth, goodness knows what Norman might do to him. So he doesn't tell him the truth. So obviously there are a lot of objections to Peter's line of reasoning, some of which really could have been addressed by, you know, having the thing I mentioned earlier where there was another superhero who had a bad time after his secret identity got out. Or maybe there could have been a comparable situation where Norman did use someone else to get to someone else. You know, just like giving an example where the viewer could be like, okay, I still think, maybe you could still think that Peter should tell Harry, but you're like, you know, I can also understand how he comes to this conclusion. So yeah, I feel like that was a missed opportunity. But I must admit, I still don't completely hate this because, like, whenever you're a teenager, you can run into this. Whenever a friend of yours is having trouble at home, there is a limit to how much you can do, especially if your friend's horrible family turned them on you. Like, so even though it was something that Doc Ock said that made Harry ultimately push Peter away, Norman was the one who manipulated Harry to the point that he would do that just because he found out that Peter was maybe working with Spider-Man. It's a tough situation because you love your friend and you want what's best for them, but you're also really young and you don't know what to do. Peter doesn't have anyone to confide to about this. I mean, maybe Miles, but Peter really needs like an adult superhero who he can share the whole situation with and get feedback from. But he doesn't have that in his life. That is, for me, that is always part of why Spider-Man is a likable character, because he has many limits and he doesn't have as many resources, but he's still trying to do the best that he can. And that's the same thing that's happening here. So seeing Peter trying and failing to help his friend in this situation and do the right thing here, it just made me root for him even more. Which leads into the fourth thing that they did well, which is the setup for season 2. Near the end of season 1, Peter and Harry make up and team up when basically all of New York City is turned into giant spiders as a result of the Jackal's big scheme. Even Aunt Meg is turned into a spider. I think they could have made that really dramatic, but I also understand why they didn't do that, because that could have been pretty scarring for some kids. Anyways, a few episodes into this storyline, Peter finally shares that he's Spider-Man so he can use his blood as part of an antidote to turn back Norman Osborn from a spider. And Norman was like the mind control spider. Like, he was being controlled by the Jackal, but he was also kind of like the big boss spider to an extent or whatever. So healing him was practical, both for, you know, saving the day and also, you know, because Harry's there and he wants to help his dad. So they make the antidote and they save Norman and they turn everyone back from spiders. Afterwards, Norman is struggling because the antidote, again, made from Peter's blood, is basically killing him. The antidote was a first pass. They didn't have time to refine it. So Norman is he was basically their test subject for the final safer version of the antidote that the rest of NYC got. And Harry is very angry that Peter hid being Spider-Man for all of season 1. But he's like, I need your help to save my father. He's dying because of this antidote that we gave him from your blood. But at the same time, Doc Ock and Sinister Five have started to cause havoc now that nobody's spiders anymore. So Peter goes to stop them, saying he'll be back to help Harry. Okay, so this was such an interesting part of the story. Harry, now that he's alone and has no one to help him, he turns to experimenting on himself to try to find a cure for his father. At first he's like, no, I can't do this. But Norman is dying in front of him and he's like, I have no choice. And it's made very clear that this is not a safe or a good decision. Also, it turns out that Dr. Octopus had lured Spider-Man there, and because Peter is alone and overwhelmed by the Sinister Five, the Sinister Five are villains who are under Dr. Octopus's control. So Peter gets a brain control chip put on him too, which brainwashes him. So now he is part of the Sinister Five, or the Sinister Six now. Oh, and also, even whenever taking over his brain, Doc Ock does not take off Spider-Man's mask. I guess this happens a couple times in this season where people like have Spider-Man at their mercy, but I guess they just really don't care who he is. Like, this even happens with Norman once. It was kind of strange, but whatever. Harry manages to save his father and sees that Spider-Man is doing these villainous things as part of the Sinister Six. So he gets into that horrible hobgoblin getup. It looks like 3 sizes too big for him, which actually kind of makes sense later. But anyways, he goes to face Peter and stop Doc Ock. And he almost gets killed in this wonderful scene where Peter straight up kicks him in the face.
It's me, Harry! Even after everything, you're still my best friend! Don't...
But seeing Harry falling to his death snaps Peter out of it, and he manages to get the mind control chip off of himself and then off of the other villains, who then turn on Doc Ock, and they run away. Doc Ock's trying to not be pummeled to death. So anyway, so they're taken care of. So after this, Peter helps Harry get home, and we have another Father of the Year moment from Norman, where he's like, Spider-Man is playing you, Harry. Don't you think it's weird that he managed to overcome the mind control device?
I inspired him.
You're being naive.
No, Norman. You're naive for not realizing you live in a world where the power of friendship is stronger than villainous schemes and science, apparently. Anyway, so in the very final season 1 episode, Norman is wheelchair bound, but he's doing better. Peter and Harry have made up, so they're being superheroes together. It's really fun. They're having a good time, chilling with their bestie, beating up bad guys. After that, the best possible series of events happens. 1. Harry blacks out, presumably because of the experiments he did on himself. He goes home for the day. 2. The Hobgoblin then shows up a few minutes later and attacks Spider-Man. And, we don't see his face, but Peter, of course, assumes that it's Harry, and he's like, what are you doing, man? But the Hobgoblin just keeps trying to murder him. 3. Peter escapes, and then he goes to confront Harry. 4. Before he can get there, Norman finds Harry blacked out in his room and wearing the Hobgoblin outfit. Norman is like, look at the TV. It's on the news. You just tried to kill Spider-Man. You did all those crazy experiments on yourself. Your unconscious mind must be taking over to become the hero the city needs by killing Spider-Man. You should be proud of yourself. And then he leaves. 5. Peter then comes in and he's like, what the heck happened? And Harry, of course, believes what his father said, which leads to what I call the Twilight scene.
I can't be with you. It's not safe. You've got to get as far away from me as possible.
What if I'm not the superhero, Peter? What if I'm the bad guy? Anyway, Peter is attacked by the Hobgoblin once again, and he almost gets crushed by a bridge. Then he goes and he does a little sneaking around and finds out that Norman was in the Hobgoblin suit when he was being attacked. Oh, and Harry also shows up. So yeah, so basically every time that the Hobgoblin attacked Spider-Man, that was Norman. And we have a nice character development moment where Harry sees that Norman, A, is not wheelchair bound, B, he is in the Hobgoblin suit, which means he's been lying to him all this time. And yeah, he starts to freak out, but he doesn't lose his head. Harry has to choose to support his father or Spider-Man in this fight, and he chooses his bestie. Good on you, kid. And then things start blowing up, and they have to flee, and Norman is caught in the explosion. But the body was never found. So, we know he's alive. So that ending set up a few key things. 1, the narrative has punished Peter and Harry for Peter choosing to do his Spider-Man job over helping his friend. Peter fell into Doc Ock's control as a result of this choice. He was only set free again through the power of friendship, specifically the friendship that he prioritized less than being a superhero. So basically, the narrative is implying that friendship is more important than being a superhero. This is reinforced in the very last episode where Miles helps Peter out before the final battle with Norman, and Miles says, "I figured helping a friend was more important than chasing the bad guy." And yeah, so this seems like a kind of an odd take for a superhero show, and I loved it. It was just different, and there really isn't a definite conclusion to what this means, so there's a lot that they could do with it in season 2. Second thing that they set up is that Harry will face consequences for experimenting on himself. While he did not, sadly, become a vampire trying to eat people, he was blacking out and stuff. And again, the show made sure that we, and Harry, and Norman, and Peter, all knew that the self-experimentation was bad.
Not sure what's coursing through my veins, and I'm terrified at what I might have done to myself.
Harry tells Peter he'll go see a doctor, but he never does, so we know this is going to be a problem for him in season 2. The third thing they set up, Norman, who is presumed dead, but we haven't seen a body, so yeah, obviously he's not dead, left Harry what appears to be Green Goblin stuff. One of the final shots of season 1 is Harry in Norman's office, where a creepy, hidden green room opens up, and a recording that Norman left for him is like, "This is all yours now," basically. So yeah, Norman's gonna come back. Green Goblin will hopefully be a thing. 4. Harry's arc is not done. In season 1, Harry is motivated by 3 conflicting desires. 1, the desire to make a name for himself and to be his own person. This desire is very natural, especially for a teenager, but it does not necessarily bring out the best in Harry. In the episode with Blizzard, Harry and Peter had a design for basically freezing and preserving food in an energy-effective, low-cost way that was obviously intended for practical and humanitarian purposes, which the Blizzard steals and uses to freeze everything. Later on, Harry also weaponizes this design.
It's our gauntlet tech. I just made it more user-friendly. You mean you weaponized it? Yeah, that's what the Blizzard did with our original gauntlet, so why not fight fire with fire? Ice with fire?
Peter is like, "I am not comfortable with this." And of course, Harry responds in his usual level-headed manner.
Wow, what are you, my dad? All anybody wants to do is stop me from using what I make.
The best part about this is that it leads to the funniest moment in the series. Harry agrees to de-weaponize the design, but no, actually that was a lie. He shows up to fight the Blizzard with the sword. It's still the same. And the most wonderful moment in the series happens. He doesn't even get punched properly. It's just like, flick. This also knocks him out, and Spider-Man has to save him. How humiliating. Generally speaking, even when Harry isn't at his best when trying to prove himself, this desire does often overlap with his second, better desire, which is the desire to do the right thing and be a hero. He made that flame sword and charged Blizzard like a fool to prove himself, but also because the city was being frozen and he wanted to help. There are several times in the season where Harry does put his grievance with Spider-Man aside and works with him and other supporting cast members because he wants to do what's right. However, the desire to do the right thing doesn't always win out. Near the end of season 1, Oscorp blows up. Harry tried to stop this from happening, which in itself, isn't bad, but Peter literally dragged him away. Harry is a little bitter about it.
Why did you stop me? Because you would have been killed. I could have done it. I could have been the hero this time.
How good the desire to be a hero is for Harry is basically dependent on whether or not it overlaps with his other desires. Basically, he is at his best whenever he is just trying to help his friends, which includes Peter. So the best example of this at the end of the season is whenever he's trying to save Peter from Doc Ock's control, and he even states this good desire word for word.
This isn't about winning. It's about doing the right thing.
You fool! It's always about winning!
By having Doc Ock give a counter argument here, and this is a very Doc Ock's being a very bad boy at this time. So the show is making it crystal clear that Harry is in the right here. This is a good heroic moment for him. So this desire to do the right thing in its purest form is basically the best of Harry, which leads us to what brings out the very worst in him, which is the desire to please his father and prove himself as an Osborn. At the darkest moments in the series, Harry is completely focused on this desire. By the time the series finale comes along, before he makes up with Peter again, he is associating himself very strongly with his father and the Osborn name.
We saved the city. No, you saved the city. And you destroyed Oz Academy. Literally wiped my name from the sky!
He winds up associating himself with the name Osborn, with Oscorp, with the stupid Osborn Academy for Geniuses, and he basically winds up thinking the exact same way that Norman has been manipulating him into thinking all this time. So basically, Norman has won at this point.
But Oz Academy? My work? Our legacy.
So I like that Norman does not let up on him, like even at this time. Harry is doing and thinking what he wants him to think and do, as far as he can tell. And soon after the exchange in the elevator, he tells Harry exactly what he always wanted to hear this whole first season, but it's followed up by, "You are an Osborn."
You're much more than a scientist. You're a hero. And now Spider-Man has finally shown his true colors. It's time for an Osborn to finally stand up to him.
And a reminder that Norman's approval is still very conditional.
Do you want to truly make me proud? Stop, Spider-Man.
All of this makes it clear that Harry could never truly win Norman's approval. So basically, this third desire to please his father and prove himself as an Osborn is essentially hopeless. There's also that Norman basically sees Harry as an extension of himself and his legacy, and not his own person. In the final confrontation, Norman is like, "I'm doing all of this for you, Harry."
You're not doing this for me! You're doing it for yourself!
I'm doing it for the Osborn name!
So Harry does finally choose to reject his father in this final episode, but you don't get over emotional manipulation from a parent in just one episode in one scene. One of Harry's final lines is also that he misses his father. And also we see that he doesn't leave or sell the Oscorp company. So this third desire, along with any remaining affection Harry has for his father, this definitely gonna come up again in season 2, but in a different way now that Harry is wise to his father's selfishness. So to recap, the ending set up 4 things. 1, the narrative will continue to explore friendship versus superhero duties, leaning towards friendship being more important than superheroing. 2, Harry will face consequences for experimenting on himself. 3, Norman isn't dead, obviously, and Harry might become the Green Goblin. 4, Harry's character arc is far from complete. Okay, so here I am at the end of season 1, and I'm like, holy crap, season 2 is going to be awesome. Season 2 starts with a filler episode about Peter's summer vacation. Harry is not in it, but it's filler, so it doesn't matter. But in the second episode, it opens with Harry and Peter chatting on the phone. And guess what? Harry is in Europe. Yeah, he's gone for 22 of the 26 episodes of this season. Because this is no longer the Peter and Harry show. This is the Dr. Otto Octavius Redemption Arc Special. So in the comics, there was an arc where Otto becomes the superior Spider-Man. And I have a theory that this is why Doc Ock helps out in No Way Home. Like, he was Spider-Man at one point in the comics, so it makes sense for him to be allied with all these Spideys. Anyways, so Doc Ock was in a coma, but he takes over Spider-Man's body and basically forces Peter's mind into a broken robot. And then, despite suddenly becoming a huge jerk, this new Otto Peter manages to fool everyone. And I was like, wait a minute. He can fool Aunt May, but he can't fool Harry, right? I mean, they've known each other for a really long time, and I'm sure that they have a bunch of, like, stupid inside best friend jokes and all that rubbish that would be very strange if Peter suddenly forgot, because he's not that type of guy. So, yeah. So Harry's gonna come back, and he's gonna do the detective work, maybe working together with Miles, and he's gonna figure out what's going on, and they're gonna help Peter get his body back. I was like, it sucks that we haven't seen Harry yet, but if he comes back and does this, that'll be a pretty cool, return for him. But yeah, no, they didn't do that. Peter gets his body back through a combo of Otto having a redemption arc and Miles helping out. But, so now, Harry didn't come back. But as I mentioned, Harry eventually does come back for the last 4 episodes of the season. So you may ask, do they finally tackle the 4 things that the end of season 1 set up? Before Harry comes back, Doc Ock, or Otto, because he's not Doc Ock anymore, he's back in his body, he's no longer in a coma, and he shows up, and he's like, I'm redeemed, and I want to help you, Peter. Peter initially tells him to shove off, but he does eventually give him a chance. This leads to a pretty standard whodunit episode where they're trying to find the true culprit behind these crimes that are happening. And when they finally nail down the bad guy, this leads to a very weird moment.
I owe loyalty to no one, only to the Goblin Nation.
This made me laugh out loud because, one, the whole Goblin Nation thing is just, I don't think it's been brought up barely at all, if any, in season 2 at all before this point. And also, it isn't easy to tear your shirt. Like, this isn't just like his crappy, like, thin t-shirt. This is something he's wearing to work. Like, it would be hard to do this. He just really wanted this. Then Harry comes back, and he and Otto do not trust each other because of the events of season 1. As I mentioned, Norman basically lied to and manipulated and gaslit Doc Ock. And it doesn't help for Harry that later on in the episode, whenever he returns, he sees this happening. Peter having smoothies with someone else at the diner where you and Harry always met up. I am shocked. Anyways, after this, I got extremely excited because Harry and Peter go to a cemetery and see the Osborn mausoleum has been damaged, almost like someone forced the doors open from the inside. And I was like, oh my gosh, are we going to have like vampire Osborns? We don't. Anyways, Otto goes back to the hideout that he and Peter have been sharing recently, and he's like brooding to himself, which leads to this amazing line.
Only Parker seems to believe my desire for redemption is genuine. Parker, who is so trusting he would run off with that no-account globe-trotting Osborn.
He sounds like a disapproving Victorian matron. Anyway, both Otto and Peter find out that Harry wasn't in Europe. That's right, he was hiding away all alone somewhere in New York, working on a big giant robot. Apparently, the green room that we saw at the end of season 1 was not connected to the Green Goblin in any way. Instead, it was just green lighting for a room filled with big robot blueprints. And let me remind you that in season 1, we had a lot of big violent robots. So like, this adds nothing new. So remember Harry's 3 conflicting motivations? They are kind of back, but just in the worst possible ways. So like, when describing how he found the blueprints, he says that his father wanted
me to thrive, to bring greatness to the name Osborn.
So yeah, he's just bringing greatness to the Osborn name, just like his father always wanted him to. And then when the stupid robot is stolen, well...
And you built this thing? Why would you do something like that?
I intended it to be used for good.
So, okay, he wants to prove himself again, and they did do an okay job calling back to that Blizzard episode, because, like, that fire sword that Harry made, which Peter was all like, this isn't good because someone bad might get their hands on it and use our design that was meant for, like, peaceful purposes as a weapon. Well, that exact same thing is happening. It's being mass-produced and used by the members of the Goblin Nation, who also have suits that look like the Hobgoblin. They all look so silly. Yeah. Can you tell I don't like the Goblin Nation? I think it's pretty left field, and it's pretty unremarkable. I mean, they do this thing where a lot of the villains are working together in the Goblin Nation, but I don't know. What about Harry's desire to do the right thing and to be a hero? What about the epiphany that he had at the end of season 1 that his father has been lying to him and was a selfish jerk? These things do not come up. The only good thing that comes about of Harry being gone all this time is how the show handles him coming back to see that Peter is working with Otto.
I figured once I built it and showed you how it could be used safely, you'd understand. Well, that hypothesis didn't exactly pan out, did it? No, and neither will being best friends with a supervillain like Doc Ock. Ow!
Okay, I love how Harry just electrocutes himself at the end of that clip for no good reason. It's like the writers just kind of hated him or something. They're just like, let's just have him electrocute himself. Why not? He's just a total loser now. But anyways, Harry is a bit miffed to see that Peter and Otto are chums now.
Ock! Oh man, you have no idea how happy I am to hear your voice.
But Peter is like, no, it's okay, man. Like, you lied to me about being in Europe, which is a bummer, but I'm excited to be working with you again.
You sure? Looks like you already found someone to take my place. No one's taking anybody's place.
Which leads us to this scene where Doc Ock is having his redemption death. He's dying instead of Peter.
Is this not what a best friend would do?
Yes. It is what a best friend would do. My best friend.
So much for not taking anyone's place. And then season 2 ends. There were no consequences for Harry experimenting on himself. The green light was a really dumb red herring, and Harry's arc was never completed. The narrative didn't set up anything definitive about friendship versus being a hero because that theme was so massively connected to Peter and Harry's friendship and the lies between them. So anyways, there was a 3rd season, and I watched it hoping that maybe they would, resolve the things that they didn't do in season 2. But Harry only showed up once for that season, and yeah, him experimenting on himself didn't show up either. Norman did come back, but it was horrible. He comes back as this big green goblin guy. I mean, it made sense that, he would have been mostly dead after being caught in that explosion and that he would need a new, different body, but a big, dumb goblin guy is just so it's just so generic. And when they face him, there's no real internal conflict for Peter or for Harry. Harry is there, but he basically just disowns Norman and is like, I'm over it. There is a lot of character growth that would have to happen for a boy who has been raised by a manipulative father who he has had conflicting feelings about to be able to just up and disown him. It's too bad we didn't see any of that. Also, season 1 could be pretty goofy a lot of the time, but the tone generally got more subdued when Spider-Man was dealing with Norman. He took him seriously as a threat in general, and there's also conflicting feelings that come up when your best friend's father, who you've known for years, is trying to kill you. However, when Norman pops back up again in season 3, the tone stays the same. Peter doesn't take him seriously. There's no internal conflict. It's kind of embarrassing. The only good thing about this was seeing Harry have the chance to fight together with Peter competently. In season 1 and season 2, Harry, he spends more time getting knocked out cold by villains than any other character. Peter has to save him constantly. It's pretty embarrassing. No wonder the kid wants to prove himself. But in this final fight against Norman, they work really well together. Harry is an equal part of the team, and he even strikes the final blow, which is great. It's too bad we couldn't have had more of this and maybe saw Harry grow and work hard to level up to this point. So, given what the end of season 1 set up, what, in my opinion, should have transpired in season 2? First, Harry never should have been sidelined. To me, this was a show about Peter being Spider-Man and his dorky friendship with Harry. By keeping Harry a main character, this would stay the same. We would get plenty of fun friendship moments and also get to appreciate how both of these characters and their relationship has changed in comparison to how it was in season 1. Harry should start off season 2 grappling with all that happened at the end of the last season. He knows his father was just looking out for himself, But what about the good memories that he does have of Norman? Like, how does he reconcile these things? Additionally, what does he do about Oscorp? If he stays in Oscorp in any degree, he'll always be Norman Osborn's son. He's always had mixed feelings about this, but after seeing a glimpse of his father's true nature, the desire to establish and make a name for himself will probably become even stronger. However, grief is hard to deal with, so he might also cling onto what he has left from his father. This could be both the company itself and the Green Goblin stuff that his father left him. When outside forces begin to threaten Oscorp, which could be anything from villains who want revenge because of stuff that Norman did, to forces in the criminal underworld who want to take advantage of the company now that its leader is gone, Harry might feel like he has no choice but to do whatever is necessary to protect it. Because, yeah, Harry had very much a I had to do what I had to do kind of thing going on in season 1. He did that with turning the ice design into a fire sword weapon, and he did that whenever he experimented on himself, and he might start using the Green Goblin tech and serum to protect the company, especially if Peter didn't completely learn the bros before heroes lesson and isn't there to help him whenever he needs it most. Or Peter might only be willing to go so far to protect Oscorp. Like, maybe his kinder methods aren't cutting it. And because he chooses the high road and doesn't kill a villain or something, this comes back around to hurt Oscorp, pushing Harry to take things into his own hands to save his father's company. And maybe Harry won't outright kill anyone, but I mean, Sandman did get murdered by a child on screen in season 1, so, it's on the table, you know? Anyway, season 2, as it is, already does have a storyline that digs into the criminal underworld and brings those villains more to the foreground. So just overlap these guys and their goals and maybe like the conflicts between them with Oscorp and Harry's drama and goals there. The second thing that I would like to see in the second season that I wish happened is, Harry didn't go to the doctor, so he should be affected by the experiments he did on himself. So maybe at some point Peter and maybe some of his friends would do a checkup on Harry themselves because they find out that he lied, he never went to the doctor. But by that point, there's nothing to find. So maybe Harry started using the Green Goblin serum or whatever on himself as a way to counteract the effects of the experiments that he did on himself. This starts getting out of hand and he starts getting addicted to the green. This and the experiments could wind up affecting both his physical and mental state. But at the point whenever Peter and his friends do a checkup on Harry, the green is in his system and it makes him appear healthy, so they don't find anything that's wrong with him. And maybe the green is not like live in his system at that moment, so they aren't able to detect that like there's a weird sort of super soldier serum in your body right now. So yeah, I think you could really easily set that up. So both Peter and Harry are the type who want to try to figure things out for themselves first before they share things with their friends, even their best friends. And this has bad consequences. Peter keeps his spider powers to himself after being bit by the spider because he wants to figure out what's happening before he tells Harry. This leads to the whole secret keeping for season 1 and all the consequences of that. So even though the whole plot of I built a giant robot instead of being in Europe in season 2 was stupid, Harry keeping it a secret from Peter until he could get the robot finalized and sorted out for himself was consistent. There were also obviously bad consequences for him keeping that a secret too, which, yeah, that's good. So what I'm proposing is you can keep that trait of him being secretive and trying to figure things out. But instead of him keeping the giant robot a secret, just have him keep the Green Goblin stuff a secret instead. 3. Make the brain switch more emotionally significant. So the first season does include tech related to brain control and so on. It would be weird not to have it in season 2. So it kind of did make sense that the brain drain thing happened with the Doc Ock Peter Parker brain switcheroo. So we're trying to avoid this becoming the Dr. Octavius redemption arc special. So in what other way might the brain tech be used? In season 3, remember that I said that Norman came back as a big monster and how this is kind of dumb. I mean, think about it. In season 1, he's all about the Osborn name and legacy. So when he shows up in season 3 and he's like, I'm no longer human, I am no longer Norman Osborn, like, that's really weird. He just completely changed his tune. And like, this would be fine if all the potential he had as a human had been dried up, but it isn't. There's still a lot more that he could do as Norman Osborn or as an Osborn. So there's a really obvious solution to use the brain technology and keep Norman's character more consistent. Just have Norman do the brain switcheroo thing with Harry. This would result in 2 things. Actually, no, 3 things. This would result in 3 things. 1, Norman comes back like we all knew he would, but he doesn't wait a whole season and a half to do it. 2, the brain switcheroo can be one of the final consequences of Harry's experimenting on himself. There's also some good irony there because he was experimenting on himself to try to save his father's life, and now his father is basically using that against him. 3, it can be related to the Green Goblin storyline. So like maybe Harry is ground down through the use of the Green Goblin serum. Like he first used it to try to manage his symptoms, but now it is a means to become more powerful so he can protect Oscorp in a way that Peter and the other spider people won't. And because Harry is keeping secrets from his friends, this results in him getting completely worn out mentally and physically, and maybe he is addicted to the Green Goblin serum. Norman would use this as a chance to take Harry's brain out of his body and take over Harry's body. And by brain, I mean like consciousness. And Norman doesn't necessarily need to have been in his own body like he was in season 3. Like his consciousness could have been in a robot. He could have taken over a robot like Comatose Dog Ock did. And him being in a robot rather than being just like in his, blown up body would actually be more interesting because then he could get into the internet and things like that and help manipulate things to, set up the situation and all that for the brain drain. And there is one thing that is consistent about Norman's character. It's that he is just the manipulative type. So it makes sense for him to be setting up things through season 2 so he can accomplish this goal. And the viewer, and maybe Peter and Harry, would see clues that something strange is going on, but Peter is busy with other superhero stuff, or maybe he just doesn't, maybe he misinterprets it, and then Harry is like getting addicted and all that kind of stuff, so he doesn't get it. Then this would also make the brain switch have so much more emotional weight. So like having someone rip out your consciousness from your body and then use your body, that on its own is a pretty frightening idea. It's actually pretty horrifying. But if the person who does that to you is your own narcissistic father, who you have been grieving, that makes it so much worse. This would also lead to like a mid-season cliffhanger. Like, what memories from Harry's body will Norman get, if any? Will he learn the secret identities of the different spiders, especially Spiderman? How will he use the different connections and so on that Harry in particular has? How will Peter and the others find out what happened? Where is Harry's brain now? And what is he going to try to do to get his body back? The 4th and final thing that I think season 2 could have done is wrap up Harry's character arc. This is assuming that they are not going to have a season 3. And considering they only have like a few episodes in what we did get for season 3, I think that this show could just run its course in 2 seasons. As mentioned, season 2 does kind of include Harry's 3 motivations, which are establishing himself, doing the right thing, and pleasing his father. But it doesn't really give any conclusion, and it doesn't even really develop these things any further. And it doesn't help that he's spending time being annoyed that Otto is a big old best friend stealer. So I think that the brain switcheroo, if nothing else, would really help Harry fully accept that he can never please his father, and would just be a final push to really help him get over that desire. There could be other things and moments in the season that could lead up to that, but that could be like the final thing. I think that the main conflict would come from the desire to establish himself versus the desire of doing the right thing. As touched on, Harry as a superhero is just so much less competent than Peter. He just gets beat up, he gets knocked out, etc. he needs to work hard to level up and become more efficient and effective, and a combination of his own weaknesses plus jealousy could be another factor that pushes him to take the Green Goblin serum. He wants to be an equal part of this team, he wants to help his friends, and that could be like a good desire. He wants to do the right thing by being a superhero who his friends and the city can depend on. And with his current weaknesses, he feels like he's not dependable enough, he's not lending enough help to the team. So that would make him taking the serum, especially if it was one of the early times that he took it, more sympathetic to the viewer. Over the season, a negative character arc that leads him to getting possessed would involve him focusing more and more on the desire to establish himself, just like he focused more and more on pleasing his father in season 1. The mind switcheroo should be a huge turning point, because anything he felt that he did achieve in season 2 is just stolen by Norman. So in the fight to get his body back and defeat his father, he'll have to make the choice to either pursue his own interests and achievements or do the right thing and help his friends, because this isn't going to be just about him. Norman is going to have plans, and he's going to want to get revenge on Spider-Man and his little friends too. So Harry will only be able to ultimately succeed by choosing to do the right thing. So by the end of the season, he'll still have that desire to establish himself and prove himself. That's just a very normal human being desire, as like I said, especially for a teenager, but it'll be tempered. It won't control him anymore. He'll be able to use that desire in a healthy way thanks to the lessons he's learned in season 2. So the first season of this show was a nice example of how to have a story focused on a main character who is a cinnamon roll. Just have another important character who has a lot of internal conflict, and then make these two characters interact a lot and care about each other a lot, so the viewer also cares when the drama happens. And also, Harry having 3 different overlapping and often conflicting motivations that really affect his decisions and behavior was some nice character work. There are a lot of characters who just don't have any motivation, or they just have one motivation, maybe 2. Being able to have 3 that all make sense and work together in a character to create internal conflict is nice. And there was a lot that they could have done with that after season 1. Okay, so I don't dislike Otto in this show, and I don't actually dislike the Superior Spider-Man story itself. But that wasn't what I was looking for. Maybe I'm just the only person in the world who liked Harry. And when he disappeared in season 2, and Otto began to take his place in the show, and apparently in Peter's heart as the conflicted secondary main character and, best friend, and everyone else who was watching the show might have been like, oh, thank goodness they did that, because Harry was the worst. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see y'all next time with a new video. Bye bye!